And now I'm opening discussion, kind of questions, and Harry will for sure, I'm not sure whether he will have answers, but hopefully something interesting to say. So, raise your hands and I will give you the microphone.
Thank you. So, my name is Nicholas Westbus, and as I listened to your presentation, I understood that when you talk about educational systems, you refer to systems that educate children and young adults. And my question is, shouldn't we think about educational systems as systems that educate not only children but also adults that return to higher education later in their careers to reskill, to update their skills? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Definitely, and I would call that lifelong learning. My concern, however, is that we're not doing a good job on the basic education system preparing people for work. We're much less likely to be able to produce the systems that are needed to reskill and to continuously upgrade the skills of people already out of the school system. It's also more expensive. So yes, we need to have those systems in place, and definitely reskilling would be important. But the current system we have now that takes up about 5% of GDP, 20% of expenditures is not performing adequately. I say first we need to fix that system before we get into place something that will address those concerns that you have. But definitely that's part of it. And I think going forward, the school system will become perhaps less important in terms of learning, because people will need to learn continuously. We haven't yet designed that continuous learning system.
This will be a very easy solution. You can take the hand.
I'm sorry?
We can try turning
If
it
you
off.
switch it off, you can take the hand.
Which one is the problematic? This one?
Yes.
Yeah, so turn it off, please, and we will use just this mic which disappeared now. So.
Or the second one on the table. This, the next one.
See, let's see. So, you have more time to think about your questions? Okay, so here is a question, and I will bring you. I will take care of it.
Hello?
Does it?
Yeah. Does it work? Okay. Hello, I'm Michael Šebek. I'm a professor of cybernetics from Czech Tech. I completely agree with everything you have said, but I actually think it's even much worse than you said. So let me to add just some comments. Czech education actually is not even from the 20th century. It's, I think, from the 11th century. 19th century. Sorry. Then to that idea that education should keep pace with technology. I am afraid this is not enough, because education takes time, takes perhaps 20 years, so the system should be at least 20 years in advance of the technology. Even more, because you educate people for their whole life. So you should be in advance for, I don't know, 50 years at least. Yeah. Then, for the basic skills to be developed in very early age, I would add perhaps thinking, critical thinking, but this may be what you mentioned by problem solving. But the creativity itself is also important to be developed. And all these things are necessary so that then later man or woman can learn for his or her whole life. So something every child must be taught to learn actually. This is not easy. By the way, this is quite natural for children, but then later the school system somehow suppress this ability and stop their development. Okay? And there are some more additions which I have forgotten during my speech. But that's about it. It's really much worse than it was shown.
Is that a question?
No, I mean a question, just a question.
So can I ask a question to that? My feeling is that educational system was always lagging behind in the history. But at the same time, it was a driving force. The changes we saw, these revolutions we saw, thanks to substantial changes in the educational system, we maybe at least know the Czech schools which were built during the Austrian-Hungarian Empire already. It was a big revolution, right, in the country, which fostered, I'm almost sure I never did this research on that, fostered the growth and industrialization of the country later on. So, isn't the problem still the same? That educational systems always lag behind?
Well, I'm not sure they always like that, because like you said, education was at the forefront of progress in many ways. I think the mass education was a revolution in humanity. I think that the ability to learn, the communication, these were advances that occurred because of schooling. But as we got to mass education, universal, primary, and secondary, at some point the world changed a bit too much for school systems. So we're seeing much of those gains that we got. 20th century, I think, was a story of an equality story. These opportunities people got through the education systems changed societies tremendously. But we're at the point now that we're at risk of losing that equality that the school system helped produce as a result of the education system today. So it's kind of reverse of history. But the change needs to come, I think, through school systems, because we don't yet have something in parallel to challenge this. There are many alternatives, but these are small startup companies or specific charter schools in a particular suburb in a U.S. city, but we don't have yet a mass alternative to the school system. So that really is where we need to make those changes, but they are fundamental. And as you said, I forgot your name, I'm sorry, on the responsiveness has to be a lot quicker than it is, and we're still debating what those responses are, right? The other thing I would mention is many systems are suffering today because of the selection issue, the exams. So we see countries that are making tremendous changes to introducing, say, creativity and problem solving into the basic education curriculum. But when it comes to the end of secondary, that exam becomes the most important thing. So there everything shifts toward preparing for the exam. Globally, we spend something like $6 trillion on education training around the world. The fastest growing segment of that is test prep, preparing people for the exams, the selections, in the next level. So all that effort that should be going into doing critical thinking, lifelong learning, and the like, instead is preparing people for those exams. We're seeing some changes. Universities now don't require the SATs in the US to some extent. Singapore is abolishing some of their exams. So maybe we'll see a reform along that front, because that will free up school systems to do a lot more of those creative endeavors rather than preparing people for the next examination. But that's a big challenge as well.
So we have the ongoing debate, what can and cannot be tested here. The cutoff point, this debate which is going on now, right? So.
Thank you, Dan. My name is Marek Havergal, and I'm working with a group which is researching general artificial intelligence. And I've been involved in the global discussion, so I think it's even worse than it's worse, like, because I see where our algorithms are going. Several questions come to mind. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Dan and Harry, for coming to Prague. I would love to join you tomorrow, but unfortunately I'm speaking on a similar topic in Bratislava. Several questions. So as I say, when we discuss in this global setting, I always ask like my peer panelists to answer one question. And the question is, which skills the humans will have, which will not be the skills which the machine have. And these skills will allow the humans to generate economic value. And basically the only answer is silence. There's also discussion what we can do as humans in terms of helping the other humans to live better, in terms of care, in terms of aging population, in terms of increasing the number of teachers, in terms of politics and politicians. But often these do not create actually the economic value as we know it today. So I really think it's much worse, and this takes me to support different projects on improvement of non-cognitive skills in this country, both at the level of the preschool education as well at the level of the elementary education, because basically there is nothing happening at the moment. We have some projects at the level of higher education, but nothing at the elementary and preschool. You have mentioned that there is very limited evidence on increasing non-cognitive skills. So I just wonder if you could a little bit elaborate on that and maybe help us to design a better study, because we're running kind of a randomized control trial on that for 2 projects. One is on the preschool and the other is at the elementary level, and I would like to support it as much as I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you didn't ask me the question about which skills will people continue to have. I would have. Yesterday I would have said art, but now I heard that they're auctioning art that was designed by artificial intelligence already, so even that would have been proven false. So I love the question on cognitive skills. So I think the first thing that we need is a measure of these non-cognitive skills. I don't think this is something that's susceptible to these multiple choice exams that we have for cognitive skills. Also, where do we get our measures of non-cognitive skills? It's all self-reported. And I even saw a survey once, not a very well done one, that asked people if they habitually lied. And that was part of the assessment. And I was thinking, if you lie about that, how do you believe anything else? So I thought we have very poor measures of this. So we're at the infancy of measuring non-cognitive skills. Lots of good research on grit and resilience, but not a lot of measurement that we can use. It's all self-reported. So we need something else that will give us a sense of that. Then we'd have a better measure of what interventions would work. Because right now, if the baseline is asking people, in order to assess their non-cognitive skills, doing something and then measuring the change in those answers, I think it tells you something, but I'm not sure it's the same as what we do when we do a cognitive test, where we have an objective measure of that. So we need to make progress first on the measurement side. There are efforts going on, but we haven't found them yet. Nevertheless, I think we do know enough about this to evaluate these studies, and we have several ongoing as well, so happy to share details with you. I think the big challenge after the pilots is how to incorporate this into school systems. And I do see the examination, the selection exam, as being a kind of barrier to the fundamental change in most school systems. If we look at the most successful education system in Europe, Finland, and why they do so well. The narrative has been about the system as it is today, which is nice, but what happened a few decades ago? And the big change was in the 70s and 80s when they went from a selective education system with a vocational track to a comprehensive system. And that research has proven decisive, I think, in explaining what happened there. So fewer exams, less selection, more more focus on getting those skills that people actually need. And I think they're doing a lot today to further their curriculum, getting away from subjects and the like. So that's a system still worth looking at historically and what's going on. But happy to talk to you later about the non-cognitive study. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Pablo Josieres, I'm the Economic Counselor of the University. Having mentioned Ray Kurzweil, I would like to come back to his theory of exponential technological growth, and that's comparing to our, let's say, educational race to catch up with technological trends at the moment. And given, on the other hand, the statements, some statements made by Jack Ma of Alibaba, that maybe education should move to a more classical, let's say, environment. Maybe isn't it time maybe to have a paradigm shift in education rather than trying to catch up with the technological advances? Thank you.
Thank you very much. When I was thinking about education 1.0, 2.0 and the like, and especially at say 3.0, where the idea becomes personalized learning and self-actualization, I was thinking that's actually what we had with Aristotle and and even the Asian philosophers, where it was one-on-one instruction and focused on the individual. So actually going forward in education means going way back. And I think that might be a better way than, and as you said, trying to mimic the industry. Because the other reaction we have in education systems is to try to prepare people for work, but for work today, right? And by the time they bring the machines in using the factories are no longer using those machines, and you still go to these shops. I see them all the time in countries. The old machine shops that they got from somewhere, they're still teaching children those things. So I think you're right, we can't keep up that way, but we can try to keep up in terms of the critical thinking, the creativity, the self-actualization. That's doable. It's a question of numbers, it's a question of organizing the classroom. We can't do it in this kind of classroom environment, but we can certainly shift around the classroom, and that's where some of these experiments are taking us. So hopefully it brings us to Education 4.0, which is actually what we had before mass education. Thank you for that.
My name is Božena. I would like to mention that we are in the phase of making a revision of our curriculum. We prepared today a new version of the framework program for schools, which includes also the computational thinking, which is probably one of the main competences which we need if we would like to understand how computers work. But we face the big resistance in the whole school system. This is our main problem. The teachers are not prepared, and probably there is only a little chance that we can be so quick to be prepared for the education for all.
Yeah, I agree. Teachers is the key. It's the might be the area where we see resistance today, but I do think it's an area worth working on, because otherwise we have nothing else, right? In most developing countries, 90% of the expenditures are on salaries, teacher salaries. So pretty much all you have is the teachers. So if we don't invest in them, but a bit more needs to be done also on the selection of teachers, the support the teachers get, and I still would say that the other kind of resistance to change is parents, and primarily because of the selection exams. And we see this in, we saw it in Japan when they tried to change the selection exam. Parents protested. And if you see in most countries, you ask parents if they want to see change, they say yes, but not for their children. They know the system. Wait till they get through it, then you can reform the system. So there's always going to be that kind of catching up. But I think preparing teachers and parents with more information about what's going on is probably a key step something that I'm sure you're doing, but needs to continuously be in the forefront, because people are kind of myopic about their own systems, but their own families, but then the whole system itself needs to get the support of parents, teachers, policymakers, business, and industry.
Just a note, I'm thinking about the salaries of teachers and so on. Given the demand for new type of education, you can imagine how more expensive it will be to attract people who will be able to do that in education. So we are paying extremely little. Now we are talking that we should pay even more than others pay. Okay? So it wouldn't be cheap. I mean, it would cost a lot of money to attract these smart people to work in schools, not in IT or other companies. Just my thought. So, you have a question there? I will have to deliver a microphone through.
So, it is non-cognitive skills and basic skills like reading and writing are so important. Czech Republic has a great asset of that many women stay actually for long years with their children. So maybe they could be also supported to better teach their children to read and these things. Like my mother, for example, she taught me to read before entering school. I think it was a great asset for me.
Yeah, parental education programs around the world have worked very well to try to bring less or disadvantaged families up to the minimum requirements. Many children born with disadvantages and programs that support households to give some of these skills, and also the basic nutritional and physical stimulation that's needed. Very high return programs, and actually reduce the cost of education. So a lot of those expensive programs, Daniel, could be offset by making the system more productive. Preparing children so that they're actually successful in school reduces the cost of basic education. Better educated citizens reduce other social costs. So I think if we do make the system more productive, we can see cost savings in other areas, but that remains to be seen if we can really move the needle on the school system. But I'm sure we could find ways to make it more affordable. So shifting the basic teaching, maybe closing some of the less successful vocational programs, saving a lot of money that can go into what actually works. But there we need a larger evidence base, I think.
PwC. I guess you shouldn't be surprised if you put examination at the end of educational process, that the process is focusing on increasing the success in the examinations. So shouldn't we start from fundamentally changing the examinations, which would trigger the rest of the system?
Precisely. And that's the Finnish success, was going comprehensive and getting rid of early selection. It's the Polish success in the early 2000s where they delayed the vocational program. Their PISA scores went up significantly. So we know how to do it, and countries can do it, but I think that final selection exam has proven the most difficult to change in any country. The only East Asian country that I know that's attempting to shift this is Singapore. They've already announced getting rid of the class lists, and they're taking on the selection exam. So it might happen, but that is the key. You're right. If that's the ultimate goal, the real goal of education systems, that's where attention will shift. But that's proven to be the most difficult one to shift. People seem to be more willing to delay selection or to get rid of the early selection exams, but the final one seems to stay in there. I grew up in a system without any selection or final exams, and a country without a Ministry of Education. So it's all possible. It all can be reorganized. I guess it's a question of prioritization more, I think, than resources.
So we know how important these things are, at least we here in this room. That's my guess, feeling. And we are recording that to spread this knowledge to a wider society so that there is a bigger push for institutional changes of the education system. Otherwise, without normal politics, it will not work. Okay, still, I think we can still afford one or two questions. There is, yeah.
You mentioned that one of the challenges that the education systems are going to be facing is to teach the relevant skills, right? But the curriculums, school curriculums even now are overloaded, and my question is whether you have done any research to figure out what subjects are obsolete already, so we can get rid of them from the school curriculums, or at what levels should they stop being mandatory for the students?
Good practical question. Yes, curriculums are overloaded, and that's a problem in itself. So even without the added complication of relevant skills or new skills or the automation, most systems are overloaded. In fact, in our analysis, we've seen that developing countries tend to have much larger curriculums, more subjects, more hours per subject than the high-performing systems that are teaching fewer subjects, fewer classroom hours. So a teacher in Japan spends less time in the classroom, but more time preparing for classes. Same in China. Teachers are getting together, sharing teaching experiences, fewer hours than, say, an American teacher spends in the classroom. So you can actually get more out of doing seemingly less, but focusing on what's key. Many of the subjects are preparing people again for the selection exam. So that's critical in most education systems, and a real binding constraint for most of them is that they can't really release students from this. A couple of promising practices is the way we teach those compulsory subjects, doing group projects, teaching math through, building an enterprise with, so simulations in the classroom can actually help. A lot of those become very expensive to do. Technology could help on that as well. So I think we need a bit more creativity, but we do need the official systems to kind of relax those heavy requirements on curriculum and examinations in order to give teachers more autonomy on what they do in the classroom. But all of these depend, again, on the system itself and its willingness to shift a bit. We haven't yet seen many countries shift their curriculum to make it more, open to the new economy. I think Japan, in my view, has come the closest to this by incorporating their sense of the traditional focus with the new requirements on group work and community service within the primary school curriculum. I haven't seen that anywhere else. And it seems to be a promising avenue for public school systems.
And I have this. Yeah. Okay. I have one very tough question.
Thank you. So you are talking a lot about testing. Do you think it's bad per se to use testing for evaluating pupils, or is it that we test wrong skills or wrong knowledge, which is relevant for the future?
No, thank you. I don't think we test enough. Selection exams I consider different from testing. I think testing, teachers do it in the classroom almost every day. These kind of informal quiz or just asking somebody. I think you need that. In many developing countries, they don't even do that. So we need more testing, but not testing to select people or to hold them back, but testing to inform teachers and policymakers about what's happening. So we need more testing, informal testing. We also need more standardized testing, which allows policymakers, again, to base their decisions on actual evidence and practice. What we don't need are more selection exams. I think this is, it drives the curriculum, and especially in weaker education systems which lack national standards. They tend to be to get written by textbook providers, a real monopoly industry worldwide, and then driven by selection exams, which tend to keep people out. So I take a different view on testing than exams. I think tests are useful, and a good test is the most useful. We don't need bad tests, we don't need more selection exams, but more information on student performance that can be used by teachers to address their lessons and by policymakers to make the system more effective.
So I saw one last hand there. Is it still there? Is it short?
Thank you. My question now is, isn't it a too big a job for the governments around the world to adapt the educational systems quickly? Maybe we could change or think about changing the structure and move certain levels of education to the private hands, because after all, as we're talking about educational systems being at the forefront of development, I think we're talking about places like the US, where in the past couple of decades, the private held universities were at the forefront of technological development.
Yeah.
So do you think this is a way?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say I would distinguish between provision and finance. So I think in most countries, basic education, especially compulsory education, is a government priority, meaning that finance it, somehow regulate it, or whatever is needed. It doesn't necessarily mean providing it. So we see good examples of systems where you've got 100% public finance and mostly private delivery. Netherlands, Belgium being two examples. So that's definitely helps a lot. I think what we see in most developing countries is that the government takes on everything: finance, regulation, management, provision, and does a suboptimal job in all of those. We don't expect governments in high-income countries to do all of those things. If you think about it, national governments in advanced countries don't do anything related to finance or provision. Those are local functions. Local governments do that. Governments, national governments are more in charge of steering and public policy, maybe accountability, but pushing the functions closer to the community and using non-state providers for delivery certainly works. But for most countries, education is a public priority and a public service. So we do need to get the government part right. And getting the government part right might also mean ways to work with the private sector. In advanced countries, no more than 10% of enrollments in basic education are in the private sector. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's above 30%. It's a growing private sector at the basic level, but not in concert with the public sectors. These are privately financed schools. That helps those who can get into those schools. Doesn't necessarily make the system better off, which is what we need through some kind of partnership.
Okay, and my last question at the end. We seem to agree that educational systems worldwide, most of them need some notch, smaller or greater, including Europe, including Czech one. Most of us agree. So my question is, given your new target region you are responsible for, what we can expect? Can we expect anything from the World Bank to help in nudging the Czech or the Central European educational system, or you will just observe and focus on other, even less developed systems like Ukraine and others? If you can briefly tell.
Yeah, well, thank you. So my remit is Europe and Central Asia, and for us it includes the European Union as well as the developing parts of Europe and Central Asia. So we do traditional World Bank finance projects in lower income countries in the region. We also have a healthy program of technical assistance programs where we work with governments at different levels on specific problems. We're working, the bank is now working in countries that graduated long ago. We're working in Greece, Italy, on specific agreements, usually through the European Union. Wednesday I'm going to Bratislava. It's an emerging technical assistance program for us. So we definitely want to learn from the Czech experience, and happy to provide any support, share experiences and the like with all governments in the region.
Thank you very much. And a few announcements or reminders. We'll have 2 additional events like that, both in December. The first one will be on the role of school principals, partly empirical, partly general principles by Professor Rifkin from the US, one of the best people doing this kind of research. And we'll have another event together with Swiss Embassy on dual education and vocational training. I think it will be around December 13. So both of these will take the economic perspective of both topics. And if you are interested in these or other events or publications, please do not hesitate to send us an email to IDEA, and we will put you on our list following our GDPR regulations. So I'm at the end. The last announcement is that there is refreshment for all of us in number 6 behind your shoulders. And let me finally thank again to Harry Patrinos for his presentation and discussion. Thank you.